public school system. So on that last piece, the controversial piece, privately conducted schools can develop exclusively white schools, exclusively colored schools, and mixed schools. What he said is that vouchers could be used to gerrymander schools by race. So vouchers were used for all deliberate slowness after Brown. The whites in the South didn't want black kids to go to school with their children after Brown versus Board of Education. So what they did was they created what were called Segregation Academies. They were created in states across the South after Brown versus Board. Now, some of you might be saying to yourself, well, that was a long time ago, Segregation Academies. Well, these schools still exist today. For example, as the NAACP worked in North Carolina to desegregate the schools, private school enrollment tripled in that state. Increased enrollment in private schools was often concentrated in counties that were majority African American. Some of these legacy segregation academies are still clear about how you can attend their predominantly white schools. You can read more about this in the blog post on Cloaking Inequity Truth, Why Vouchers and School Choice Were Created. This is a screen grab from last week. The Lorentz Academy is one of the segregation academies that was originally created. You can see here, how can you attend this primarily white academy? What did they put on their website? The North Carolina Voucher Program. So to think that that this is our ancient history, this is the past, this segregation academy still exists, and they still use vouchers for a primarily white school. So it's also important to say that in many states, the constitutional language for the state constitutions is pretty strong. Remember I told you Betsy DeVos tried to change the Michigan Constitution so that voucher monies could flow directly to religious schools and directly to corporations. Well, so what they've done is they've created what are called neo-vouchers. I call it creative money laundering. And what they do is they create a foundation, and the money goes into the foundation, the tax dollars, and then it goes to the church or corporation or whoever is running the school. And you see these across the United States. This is their latest attempt to do vouchers. In Arizona, they want to do this for every kid. In Florida, they want to do this for every kid. This is recent news. But then the question you always get, well, okay, so what about all this? Vouchers, kids perform better if you have vouchers. But the predominance of the research literature is pretty clear that that is not true. There's no dearth of research on school vouchers, either domestically or international. The newest reviews of existing voucher studies point out that overall the impact on test scores for students using vouchers is sporadic and inconsistent. Those are the words that Chris Kubinsky used in his book, Why Public Schools Outperform Private Schools. And generally have an effect on achievement that's statistically indistinguishable from zero. Let me say that again. For those, how many of you have had a stats class? I know I have grad students and teachers. So the studies show that the impact of vouchers are statistically insignificant from zero. Now here's the thing. The Credo study said the same thing about charter schools, but let me come back to that just a minute. So there's studies in Louisiana that raised substantial concerns, finding that vouchers significantly injure students who attended private schools. So if you had a voucher and went to a private school, compared to the public schools, you did worse in the private schools, not better. Small-scale voucher programs in Milwaukee, Cleveland, DC have also failed to increase student achievement. The official evaluation of neo-vouchers, remember I told you about neo-vouchers. What are neo-vouchers again? This circuitous routes, right? I found that in Florida, the students that received the neo-vouchers performed no better, and in some cases worse than the comparable students who attended the public school system. This is the research on vouchers. Now, there are folks in think tanks, there are folks at the University of Arkansas, at Harvard University, they're going to try to tell you something different. But the predominance of the research shows that vouchers either have no impact or actually harm students who attend private schools. So let's talk a little bit about charter schools. So I published a piece in the Progressive magazine called 10 Things to Know About Charter Schools. check it out. It was the basis of my remarks at the NAACP's hearing here in Los Angeles last week on charter schools. I don't know how many of you, anybody attend that? A few of you here. Pardon? That's okay. All right, so first, school choice has not cured the inequality created by markets. This is another one of those dirty little secrets, which is that the reason why our schools are in the situation they're in today is because of market-based policies, specifically housing policies, and how those policies have interacted with public policy, such as redlining. So what we're doing is we're asking the very system that created the inequality in our society to fix that inequality that system created. The position of the NAACP and the Black Lives Matter conventions from this last summer passed resolutions, and also Journey for Justice, which is another community-based civil rights organization, asking for a moratorium on charter schools. And that belief is consistent with the history of civil rights leaders. Malcolm X said that market-based policies were blood-sucking. I don't think he could have been any more clear about his thinking about market-based policy. Right? W.E.B. Du Bois said that big business is trying to usurp government in their control of public policy. And these are folks from 100 years and forward. Martin Luther King said that we have socialism for the rich and rugged market capitalism for the poor. Right? And so the positions of the civil rights organizations of today on market-based approaches to education is consistent with civil rights leaders over 100 years. Not consistent with Eli Broad. It's not consistent with Bill Gates. Not consistent with the Walton Family Foundation. But their position is consistent with civil rights leaders over the last 100 years. So, is the position of the NAACP out of touch with civil rights? Now, if you were to read the resolution, the NAACP has passed resolutions in 2010, 2014, and 2016 about school choice and charter schools specifically. And in that resolution, they talk about the various civil rights violations that students in charter schools experience and have no recourse or due process for those violations. So I challenge you to go to the NAACP 2016 resolution and see that the NAACP is actually advocating on behalf of students and families that attend those schools. Sometimes reform needs reform. Do families actually choose charter schools? Now, this is one of those sort of controversial things, because if you say this to someone that's part of market-based reform, what they're going to say is, well, parents choose, right? But here's what's different about a public versus a private system. When you go to a public school, let's say it's Wednesday, can you go enroll in that public school on Wednesday? How about Tuesday? How about Friday? How about Thursday? Okay. When you go to that public school, let's say you're a special ed kid and you have some special needs, is that public school going to say, no, I can't serve you because you're special ed? Are they going to ask you for a stack of documents this high? Are they going to ask your parents to volunteer a certain number of hours? And if you can't volunteer those certain number of hours, you can write us a check. Are they going to do any of those things? And there's actually an interesting piece called The Dirty Dozen, written by Kevin Wellner, published in the Teachers College Records, the peer-reviewed journal. He talks about 12 different ways that schools actually do the choosing in the school choice process. So what happens is and not all schools are like this, but the ACLU, for example, in their recent report, and here in Southern California, found that 1/5 of all charter schools have policies in place that allow the school to do the choosing instead of the families to choose them. At least 1/5. So who is supporting charter schools behind the scenes? I just talked about this just a moment ago. I named a couple of billionaires. And the joke I like to tell when I talk about this is that I'm a Detroit Lions fan. And so for some of you that know anything about football, this is a football team that has never been to the Super Bowl. And 5 years ago, we didn't even win a football game. So most of the time, we're the underdog. Okay? Most of the time, we're the underdog. And so in this conversation, those that believe that there are problems with school choice and neoliberalism for education and private control and privatization, we're the underdogs. Because Gates has spent millions, hundreds of millions of dollars on this. The Walton Family Foundation, the same. Even the US federal government has spent $4.4 billion in charter schools over the last 10 years. So we, as community activists, as families, as parents, as teachers, as educators, as academics, that are critical of what's happening with this transition from a democratically controlled system to a privately controlled system, privatized and privately controlled system. We're really the underdogs in this conversation because the hundreds of millions of dollars are on the other side of this conversation. So I think one of the interesting things about this is that the news media is starting to take a more critical view of vouchers, charters, and choice. For a long time, if you read a media article about charter schools, it seemed like you could sprinkle magical fairy dust and charter schools were fixing the problem. But I think that the NAACP statement, the Journey for Justice statements, I think the research community, as a decade of research has shown the problems with access and equity for students of color in school choice programs, I think that has started, even John Oliver on Last Week Tonight did a segment about charter schools. I highly recommend you check it out on YouTube. It's been viewed by 8 million people. It blows me away. And finally, transparency and accountability is needed. Like I said, Michigan has some of the lowest transparency and accountability mechanisms in the nation. There's a lot of information, for example, in California that we don't know, like school discipline data, teacher turnover data. Last session, Leno put forth the bill 322, and the Charter School Association spent millions of dollars to defeat accountability and transparency in the legislature. Now, a lot of charter folks will tell you, our charter school is a good apple because we don't do any of the things that you just talked about. Right? I think back to the Democratic Convention, and Reverend Barber, I don't know how many of you saw Reverend Barber speak in the Democratic Convention, what he talked about is that you're culpable if you're silent. And the challenge is that even if you're a good apple charter school, if you allow the lobbying association to spend tens of millions of dollars on legislative races to defeat accountability and transparency, then you are also responsible. So quickly about universal choice, because oftentimes, when I spoke at the Urban League National Conference, Steve Perry, who's a national charter proponent and a charter owner, said, well, what we really need is universal choice for every kid. And the thing is that a lot of these, this sort of pontification, we actually have examples of what happens in practice. So Chile, when Pinochet, the dictator, came into power a couple of decades ago, he decided that he didn't want the government to subsidize education anymore. So what they would do is they would offload education to churches, to private organizations, and they would still have some public schools. And so every single kid in the country of Chile received school choice. Everyone had school choice. So what happened after 20 years of school choice? Well, let me ask you a question. If you go into Safeway and you want to buy a pizza, and the pizza costs $10, and you have $5, can you buy that pizza? Can you leave that store with that pizza? Well, legally, can you? Right? And that's what happens in a market, is you have to have capital to spend in a market. So some of that capital is financial capital. So if your voucher is $5,000, and the private school costs $10,000, your family still has to find $5,000 somewhere. But it's not just that. You need transportation capital, because you need to get all the way across town to that charter school, all the way across town to that private school, right? You also need information capital. In a place like New Orleans, they have something called One App that's sponsored by the Walton Family Foundation. They call it a One App because you're supposed to be able to apply, and then you have access to all these schools. But that One App is actually like a 20 app, because there's all sorts of tributaries in the application process for all different types of schools. So you need information capital to navigate the bureaucratic process to get your kid into a school that's low performing all the way across town instead of the low performing school right next to your home. Which is what's happening in New Orleans. The vast majority of Black and Latino kids in New Orleans are going to C, D, and F schools, just like before Hurricane Katrina. And the thing is that New Orleans and Louisiana are last and nearly last in every single educational outcome. So don't believe the hype when they go around saying New Orleans is the model that we need. A one app is the model that we need. A charter school network, a portfolio district approach is what we need, because we've tried all of that in New Orleans, and after 10 years, the situation is no different for Black and Latino kids. So I will continue. So these are just some of the summaries. I've done much of these. I think two of the quick ones. One, we just published a piece in the Stanford Law and Policy Review. And basically what we showed is that students who are special ed, students who are immigrant kids, they're less likely to get access to charter schools. Now if you look at state level numbers, they look about the same. But when you drill down and use geospatial analysis and look at schools nearby, statistical differences are readily apparent. There's also issues with segregation. The UCLA Civil Rights Project released a report showing that charter schools are much more segregated than traditional public schools. Of course, the accrediting policies, which are part of those specialized admissions policies that allow some kids in and some kids out. And it's not just the admissions piece, it's also how kids leave. How many of you are in traditional public schools and have had charter school kids come to you in the middle of the year at some time? Any of you? A couple of you? Okay. And so what happens is that once you take the money for those kids, a lot of kids will come out of those schools and into the traditional public schools, because public schools will take those kids at any time. And so that's the essence of what creaming means. So this debate about whether we should have private control or democratic control of our schools actually goes all the way back to the Greeks in terms of how we thought about public policy. The debate has been between less inequality in policy or less democracy. Isn't that interesting? Because democracy is a very young form of governance, right? It's very young. I think our democracy in our country is actually a lot more fragile than we think it is. Think about that this week. So what we mean by less inequality is that when you focus on community-based solutions, and we'll talk about some of those in just a moment, you're trying to address the inequality that's occurring in those kids' lives, face on, head on, right? But when you seek to privately control schools, when you create policies that concentrate the power of the dollars of education in just the hands of a few people, in the hands of a corporation, in the hands of a privately nominated board, that is an approach that is about less democracy. So what you actually see in education reform, and a lot of people I don't think talk about this, this comparison in this way, is on the one hand, you have approaches that are community-based and are about excessive democracy, more democracy, and I'll talk about some of those. Then you have the corporate education reformers on this side. Their policies are actually about less democracy. Something actually. So what instead? What can we do instead? Because what will happen is, we'll have this conversation, and at the end of the conversation, someone will inevitably say, well, I can't wait for X to happen. I need a solution right now. And there are right now solutions. So let's talk about some of those right now solutions, okay? How do we mobilize local education? So what I have on the left are those less democratic approaches. Those top-down, private control and privatization. That's what you see on the left. And for those of you all the way in the back, you know, my eyes are going bad. If I stand here, I probably can't read it. So I'll read it to you, okay? And then on the right are the alternative to that top-down approach that's community-based and democratic. So we're always having conversations, for example, about teacher evaluation, right? PAR has been something that has been somewhat controversial here in LA. So you have value-added teacher modeling on the left, which is essentially what it does is it makes the evaluation of teachers external to the school. A statistician like me will sit in the district office and crank out a number. Sometimes they hire a company to do it in a consulting capacity. On the right, you have community-based assessments of teacher quality. And we can rethink how we can do peer citizen-centered review as an approach that's not punitive in its approach, but rather democratic in its approach. On the left, and this one always gets me in a lot of trouble because there's inevitably some TFA in the audience. On the left, you have Teacher America. And what Teacher America does is they're external to your community, They decide which teachers will be in your community, and they say, here's who your core is, take it or leave it. They say the same thing to the candidates. You're assigned to Louisiana, take it or leave it. On the right, you have collaborative university partnerships, you have community partnerships for the provision of teachers in the community. On the left, you have corporate for-profit charters. This is the predominant approach in Michigan, for example. Even here in California, where you have K-12 Inc., where the principals work for the for-profit company and the teachers work for the non-profit company. Right? And so there's some hijinks that go on with that too. On the right, you have democratically controlled charters, community schools. A democratically controlled charter is any charter where there's democratic recourse to the decisions that that charter makes. That's a democratically controlled. I don't like the idea of nonprofit versus for-profit. We've been in that conversation for a while. I believe the conversation should be about democratically controlled charter boards that there are democratic recourse. School closure, district takeover schemes. We know this was Arne Duncan's pet project, right? School turnaround. On the right, we have community-based systemic improvement, and there's a whole set of things to talk about there. We know that Arne Duncan's turnaround schools did stay turned around. Right? I just got a call from a reporter from Politico that's looking into that right now. You have one of the things we don't talk about with No Child Left Behind is that what NCLB did was it privatized the assessment of students. It took assessment out of the hands of educators and gave it to Pearson for a $500 million contract. That's what NCLB really did. And one of the things that he didn't say in my intro is that when I first left the Ed Policy program at the University of Michigan, my first job was with the Houston Independent School District. And do you know who the superintendent of my district was? Rod Page. Soon to be Secretary of Education. There's a lot of stuff I can tell you offline. I won't say in some of these things in a public forum. But let's just suffice to say that the things that I saw behind the scenes in Houston drove me to graduate school because of all the malfeasance that I saw going on in the district. The district was saying that we had 0% dropout rates in urban high schools, which was absolutely not true. The district was saying that we had closed the achievement gap on the TOS test. Right? And that was the primary evidence. See, we all say what now? But that was the primary evidence for No Child Left Behind to become law for the entire nation. The entire nation. And at the time, it was called the Texas Miracle. Have you ever heard of the Texas Miracle? Some of you that have read the literature have heard of the Texas Miracle. But at that time, that's how it was politically framed. And so, of course, all schools are not fully proficient, and we did have 0% dropout rates by 2014, which was many years after Bush left office. Because it had never happened in Texas either. Accountability is political and arbitrary and it's never worked. It sounds good in practice, but it's never worked. So you have top-down NCLB style accountability, and this is one of the cool things when I'm out of the state and I'm talking about this particular slide. I talk about the fact that California, for the last 3 years, has gone about what's called local accountability here. The idea is that we develop the LCAPs on the local level, and that communities have input in that. Now, community by community, the ability of communities to have input in that has varied. But it's 1,000% more than any input that we had in NCLB. It's still a work in progress, right? But the LCAP and the LCCF allows a carrot and a stick to go together, where Texas's top-down approach was all stick, right? And so I think there's still a lot for us to do. When I was talking to you about the beginning, I was telling you that with my right hand I was working on a peer-reviewed piece. We have a new article coming out of EPAA about how ELLs have been dealt with in LCAPs. And it's, there's this much good news and a lot more bad news. But so there's still work to do, clearly, with local accountability. You would expect that after a decade of top-down accountability that there would be some hiccups in that process, but I still think that there's promise there. So now I want to talk about how you activate. How do you do this in a way that you can create the magnitude of your impact? How do you go from one person to 1,000? The average peer-reviewed article, and this is embarrassing, okay? The average peer-reviewed article is read by 10 people. Did you know that? The average article. Now, that doesn't mean that Gloria Ladson-Billings or Linda Darling-Hammond, their articles are read much more than 10 times, right? But the average article is read by 10 people, right? And for those of you that are thinking about a doctor, you're thinking about, well, what's the use, right? But you can magnify the impact of what you do as a scholar. You have a sacred responsibility to society to be tellers of truth. I really believe that. And so when I put something on social media now, it can go to 25,000 people. Through my blog, through LinkedIn, through Twitter, through Facebook, it goes to that many people instantaneously. Does that mean that every one of those 25,000 people is going to engage with it? No, but it's going to be in magnitudes much larger than that, right? So I want to talk to you a little bit how you can activate yourself around community-based reform, around the issues that are important to you in this era, right? I think probably all of you have been paying attention to the news. And it's one thing after another, and I think in some ways it wears us down. I think in some ways, to some people, it's really quite discouraging. So I think we have to have a way forward. And this is one of those ways forward. I think, of course, one of those ways is protesting. I think one of those ways is the courts. But I think there's also some individual ways that we can be heard around these issues. And so let me tell you how I do it. So why social new media? Social new media is a technological canvas by which individuals and social media can now instantaneously communicate with citizens and allies nationally and worldwide. In fact, on Facebook, folks are watching this talk right now. So 5,000, and Facebook will notify all 5,000 of my friends that I'm on Facebook Live right now. So I just went from a room of 200 to a room of 5,000 by putting it on Facebook, right, on Facebook Live. People were giving me side eyes when I was putting it together, but that's the kind of magnitude that you can do. So here's what I call my social media ecology. I call it an ecology because like a rainforest, each part of the rainforest has a purpose. It's a part of a broader ecological balance. And so that's how I see, and this is my ecological balance on social media. So the center of what I do is my blog, Cloaking Inequity. I think about it as a place where I hold all the different work that I'm doing. If I do radio shows in Arizona, if I release an article, if a parent writes me an email and says they had this experience with a charter school or a traditional school, that's where I put all that information. I've been on a Betsy DeVos kick for about 2 weeks. So if you go to my blog right now, you're going to see a lot of Betsy DeVos. And so what I'm able to do is, so for my YouTube, and I recommend you create a YouTube channel, because I think I've had 25,000, 30,000 hits on my YouTube channel. Of course, I'm not Kim Kardashian, so I don't have millions, right? But on your YouTube channel, you can post that to your Facebook, you can post that to your blog, you can post it to your Twitter. The thing is that Facebook doesn't really like YouTube. I think because they have Facebook Live and video. So if you want people to see video on Facebook, you need to upload your video directly into Facebook instead of sharing it from YouTube. That's just one quick pro tip. LinkedIn, when you need LinkedIn, if you don't have LinkedIn, then it's already too late. You understand what I just said? So LinkedIn is one of those things that you need to be building every day over time. Build, 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 build. Because then when you need LinkedIn, or when you want to use LinkedIn, it'll be there waiting for you. Okay? And hopefully, you never need to use LinkedIn. You'll have the job that you have right now for the rest of your life. But what LinkedIn allows you to do is you can blog on LinkedIn. And here's what you do. LinkedIn has an editor, an education editor. And if you put your blog and you put hashtag #EdInsights inside the blog, she will automatically see it and decide if it should go out to LinkedIn. Pro tip. And so you can not only send your stuff to all the people you are connected with, but if the LinkedIn editor likes what you write, occasionally she'll email me and say, can you write something about this? And I'll try to do it. And then she'll send it out to the Pulse feed, the Education Pulse feed. Okay? Periscope is like Facebook Live. It allows you to broadcast whatever you're doing instantaneously during the campaign. A couple of teachers, I was giving a talk to a teacher caucus in Las Vegas. Excuse me. And they said, well, Bernie's coming to town. You want to go see Bernie? Bernie. And this was like maybe April. And I'm like, I don't know if I'm going to support. I haven't decided. Okay, I'll go see. Oh, that's my concert of that. And so, let's see. It's actually. So, what were we talking about? So I put it in the Bernie Valley, and there was probably 100 people at the Bernie Valley, which is a pretty good turnout for early in the campaign, right? It wasn't he hadn't gotten to the point where he was drawing these thousands of people. But when I put it on Periscope, 1,000 people watched Bernie on Periscope, 10 times more than were actually at the rally, right? And so that it's a magnitude thing with Periscope and Facebook Live. Twitter, that's another one of those things that you have to build. Don't think about, how many followers do I have? I only have 7 followers, right? Don't think about that. Think about Twitter as a place where, how many of you have Twitter? About happy. We need to change it. Okay? Twitter is a place where all the information will come to you. If you follow the right people, you won't have to chase after information. It'll be delivered right to your doorstep. So highly recommend you join Twitter. If you follow the right people, it'll actually save you time, not increase the amount of time you need to spend doing things. Right? Instagram, I like Instagram because it has a different younger set. If you're trying to reach college students and folks that are under 30, Instagram is that place. And it also allows you to be a little more artistic. So for example, before this talk, I took a picture of the podium, I took a picture of this, and I said, there is no time, if you're in LA, to make it here. Right? And one of the cool things a lot of people don't know is that Facebook owns Instagram. Did you know that? So the thing is that Facebook has an algorithm by which they prioritize what people see. Now, have you ever had anyone ask you, did you see that Facebook post I put up? Did you see it? Did you see it? You're like, no, I didn't see it. Right? And the reason why that is the case is because Facebook decides what you see. They have a closely held algorithm. One of the things about Instagram is that if you take a picture, share from Instagram to Facebook, if you just share a picture on Facebook, people are less likely to see it. If you share it from Instagram to Facebook, Facebook shows it to a lot of people because they're trying to bring visibility to Instagram. Does that make sense? So if you want people to actually see, for example, a meme, like I'm going to show you a meme in just a second. If you want people to see a meme, you can post it on Facebook. People may or may not see it. Post it on Instagram, you're going to get a lot more eyeballs. Does that make sense? It's the same sort of premise that when I was talking about with YouTube. If you do a YouTube video, like a march that you're doing or like a conversation that you're having, if you post it from YouTube to Facebook, most people are not going to see it on Facebook. Okay? If you take the video and upload it directly into Facebook, Facebook will show it to lots of people. Okay? So you've got to figure out the little tips and tricks to get exposure to the work that you're doing. I think that basically covers most of those things. And I can answer questions that you might have about how to create your own college or whatever. And I'll put it out there. If there are folks that have like a burning blog post, Cloaking Equity is a community project. More than 30 authors, nearly 1 million readers. So I'm very open if you down the road have a blog or you have an op-ed, you don't want it to go to the trash heap to die, send it to me and we'll see if we can get it up. Okay? Usually what I do is I put a sexy title on it and a funny picture, and then it's ready to fly. Great. So here's the concluding meme. Education empowers Americans as seekers and speakers of truth. We must retain democratic control of our schools to protect the intellectual compass of our democracy. More now than ever, the current political context demands that we do this. Thank you for your time, and I look forward to it.